So, what is a director? Particularly in the context of commercial production. Funny story here. When I was building my deck, for this presentation, I was looking for images, right, on stock image platform, and I typed director and filmmaker. And for some reason, there was an overabundance of 20-something-year-old hipster guys like this guy holding an old school clapper in front of them. I guess for them, this is a director. I don't know if I agree, but I think it segues actually pretty well into my first part, in the sense that, before speaking about what is a director, I wanted to speak about what it isn't or shouldn't be, in my opinion, right? So let's debunk some myth. Dear artists, I think everybody wants to be an artist, right? If you're in this industry, it has this appeal and this kind of vibe to it. But I think, on sets, and particularly on commercial sets, you cannot ignore the reality of the constraints, right? Whether it's the budget constraints, whether it is the crew, the clients, the brand, the location, artists go only so far. The magician, right? That person that believes that, spontaneity excuses the lack of prep, right? That can show up on set. Well, we have the light, we have the talents, we have an amazing DP. It's going to be great. We're going to figure it out on set, right? I think this is the equivalent of the, fix it in post. I think it's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for budget overages, bad blood with the crew who doesn't want to sit around waiting for you to figure it out, right? So, another myth. The savior. I've never heard a director call themselves that, right? But I think sometimes there's this bias from producers or agency folks or marketing folks that a good director will be able to save a bad choice or a bad idea, right? Whether it is a bad casting choice or just a bad script. I mean, I think a good director can elevate something, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But, if it's bad, right? I think you got to acknowledge that. The pair of hands, the idea that the director is just a warm body to get things done, dismissing the value of the strategic partnership that can exist between, the brand and the director, right? I don't think any director will ever call themselves a pair of hands, but I've definitely been in some rooms where clients or account exec, kind of have this idea. Just do this thing. We're just doing this thing. It's not complicated. I think it's rude. Just direct yourself then. The traffic cop, the schedule on set, always very important. A good director will not prioritize schedule over the content, but will still pay attention to the schedule. I think there's a bit of a balance. The traffic cop on set should be the first assistant director, technically, or the line producer, or somebody in production. But any good director will, still keep that in mind and, walk that line between what needs to be captured and, the time that you have to capture it. The asshole, right? I'm sure if you've been on sets, you've seen some of those guys. There's a lot of tales, interestingly, about very famous and successful directors that, are doing that, right? That leads by yelling, right? Personally, I think that's not the right way to be a leader. I don't think you can be an effective leader if you're an asshole. And lastly, that myth of the kind of the lonely director in the chair, right? The one that's gonna save the project, the savior, or destroy it, or the one that, that just does it all by themselves. I think it's very important to remember that all of this, any production, is a collaborative effort, right? We're not by ourselves in the chair. There's a lot of people bringing something to the table, and this needs to be acknowledged. Now, I picked this picture because I thought, that there is, in some other ways, some truth to this idea. As a director, I would argue that it can feel sometimes a bit lonely. I think being a director, a commercial director, there's not a straight path to it, right? People come from all kinds of backgrounds. Some people come from writing, some people come from brands, marketing, agency. There's lots of ways, that people become director, editing, production. So because of that, I think there's a bit of it's hard to find mentoring the same way you would if you're a crew member on a set, right? Crew member on a set, you're a gaffer, you can learn from the DP. You're a first AC, you can learn from the DP. You're a set design assistant, you can learn from the head of department. Director, it's a little harder, right? I personally am very rarely on set with another director, so I build kind of those relationships outside of set, but being able to be there and see kind of like how they do it, I think is interesting. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to make this presentation, right? Because I think there's something there to share. I think, on the flip side, I think there's very little online resources when it comes to commercial directing, particularly. I mean, if you look it up, you'll find tons of stuff about filmmaking. You'll find tons of stuff about lighting and filming and technical stuff, but very little about commercial directing specifically. Beside one guy named Jordan Brady that I think Chris knows, who's, if you don't know him, just looking up Jordan Brady. He's really the one that has a platform online for this stuff. Very great guy and does awesome work and, really share his knowledge. So all this is, why I wanted to make this presentation and, to kind of bridge that gap. So let's go back to what is a director. Obviously, not that guy. Everybody knows that directors wear baseball hats, not that kind of hat. It's part of the look. But for me, a director is first an architect, right? Unlike the artist or the magician, the person who hopes for miracle, the director, the commercial director is an architect that design the creative vision inside the reality of the budget, the schedule, and the client needs. A leader and a coach, I think it's the role of the commercial director to bring the best out of the crew and the talent, to be calm, to be respectful, to be open, to be kind. A problem solver. If you've ever been on any kind of production, you know that there is so many problems all the time, whether they're creative problems or logistical problems. So many problems, so little time, and I think that's really part of this role to figure it out, problem solve. And lastly, a translator, the person that bridged the gap between the brand strategy and the technical execution. And to that idea, I have this visual that I think is shows it well. For me, a good commercial director is the bridge between the brand needs, what the client is paying for, the execution, what is physically, logistically possible, and the audience, what people actually want to see. All right, I think there's something to remember here is that, if you lean too far into the brand, you make a boring commercial, right? If you lean too far into the execution, you make a pretty video that sells nothing. If you lean too far into the audience, you risk missing the goals of the brand, right? So I think as a director, you have to bridge all of those three things, right? And lead your crew through it. But here's the catch, a bridge needs a foundation, right? It needs support. And it's real hard to build a bridge while standing on it. So that brings me to the single most important thing you can do as a commercial director: prep. We're going to get more in the weeds of that in a minute. But if you're going to remember one thing out of this entire presentation, is this: pre-production is the most important part of the process. If your shoot day sucks, if you can feel tension or disagreement, whether with the crew or with the client, if the result is not up to par to what you're expected to do, 99% of the time, it's because something in the pre-production process was mishandled. Something was not anticipated well. Something was not thought out properly. On another note, I think personally that pre-production is also the most creative part of the process, not the shoot. And if you don't believe me, believe Hitchcock. In the 60s, Hitchcock had those long conversations with François Truffaut, who was a French director from the New Wave, about filmmaking, about their process, and what they do. They made a book out of it called Hitchcock/Truffaut. It's a very good book. If you've never read it, you should. It's awesome, and it's still very relevant today. And so Hitchcock's take was this, right? Once the screenplay is finished, I just as soon not make the film at all. I have a strongly visual mind. I visualize a picture right down to the final cuts. I wish I didn't have to shoot the picture. When I've gone through the script and created the picture on paper, for me, the creative job is done, and the rest is just a bore. So obviously, for him, the shoot was boring. I personally don't think it is. I have always a lot of fun on set. But I think, it's interesting. I mean, even though his take, I think, is very, very extreme and rigid in some ways, there's definitely, in my opinion, lots of stuff that can be made better on set. I think, keeping in mind that for him, he believed this job was much more about the pre-production, right, than it was about the shoot, right? So let's talk about pre-production. If you've ever been part of any sorts of pre-production, this all seems very familiar. You got to figure out your budget, you got to figure out your crew, you got to figure out your talents, you got to figure out where you're going to shoot, you got to figure out your gear, the permits for your location, all kinds of stuff. So many pre-production files, right? But to me, pre-pro is first and foremost about 4 things. I like the stuff that comes in 4. Establishing your vision, right? For yourself, for others. Picking the right people and empowering them. People that are going to execute on that vision and, hopefully help you elevate it. Creating trust, with set people, with the crew, with the client, with the talents, so that the process runs smoothly. And then the kind of stepchild of that, aligning with the client, with the crew, with the talents, so that everyone, moves in the right direction, in the same direction, sorry. So, let's talk about how you establish your vision. Your goal in pre-pro, right, is to define what you are making as specifically as possible before production spent a dime. If you remember Hitchcock, right, the movie is made before you set foot on set, that's what he said. That's valid for commercials too, I believe. Time on set is very expensive. You got to pay all this, all this crew, pay those location fees, all kinds of stuff to pay. But as a director or producer, your time is much cheaper, right? Even if you're a fancy director that, has high fees. So invest the time where it's the cheapest, which is the pre-pro. So let's cover a few things that are going to help you establish, your vision. First of all, the treatments. I have a bunch of examples here, all that I made. You see there's those first three ones go a little bit deeper. Those are more mood boards. I don't always do full treatments, When I do, it's often more about winning the job with an agency than it is about, really establishing the vision. But, and some things, change later. But I think for me, going through that process is always a great way to really start thinking about what I want it to look like, what I want the tone to be, and it covers typically a full treatment. It can be from like 1 page to 20 pages, but usually it covers the entirety of the approach, right? The casting, the style, Sometimes I'll even get into technical stuff if it's relevant, if it's like, there's something very challenging in the script. But basically, it takes the script and it's like, hey, this is how me as a director would like it to look like, right? It's something that is often skimmed through by the agency or whoever received it, even though it takes days to make. So there's something here, like a little tip on making it so that it can be skimmed through while still conveying the right amount of information, right? So having a good balance of the visuals that really represent the vibe, and it's not always, represent the shot, it's more like the ID of the shots, and, explanations that kind of go a little deeper, right? So visuals are super important, right? This is often made for the client first, but It's something that I still share here and there with my crew as like kind of a baseline reference of like, okay, this is what we're doing here. And I would argue that even if you're not making a treatment because that's a lot of work, you don't need to, you're not in a triple bin situation, and it's just to a brand, I think the mood board is very, very key. Again, for this idea of like establishing, this is kind of the look, trying to really put yourself in the mood of that particular project. Often, it really kickstarts kind of my creative approach. The shot list and the storyboard. I kind of bundle those two things together because they're sometime interchangeable. Some folks prefer one versus the other. Personally, I think storyboards are great for clients, but because you often end up not drawing every single shot, it's not exhaustive enough for a comprehensive pre-pro. That kind of shot list on the flip side, I don't know if you can read what it says. It says scene 1A, shot 1, description, close-up of the protagonist's face, camera close-up, duration 4 seconds, notes, natural light. I've seen a lot of shot lists like this, and to me, this is pointless. This is not saying anything about that shot. Like, I don't even know what's happening in that first shot. Maybe if it's on the call sheet, it may be useful just to know kind of the shot number, but all the description, I don't think it adds much. Not a fan of it. What I personally do is this, shot list diagram. I try to go a lot deeper in that. That's a top-down view of the whole scene with the camera and the talents in there. So if you look at the top part over there, the square things are cars. The circles with colors, those are talents, right? Characters in the frame. And then in green, you can see the camera, right? And you have each different shots. In the bottom, those are desks and characters seated, and you see camera. And then the little text that you absolutely cannot read from here is the description, right, of the shots. Like for instance, this is a medium close-up, hero shot, 45 mil. Personally, I can't draw perspective for shit, so that's one reason why I don't like the storyboards, because I have to rely on a storyboard artist. Can't do it myself. But I think this conveys so much more information, and I think is key. So I tend to get pretty detailed. Hopefully you can read a little bit more in here, but you see, for instance, here we have camera 1. It's a slider. The car parks by the valet, so you imagine that's establishing shot right. There's a small push-in that you can see with this. There's a character coming out of the car and going around the car. You have a medium close-up of the hero as he's coming out of the car. This is from a real project, by the way, that you can see on our website called Shady Rays. So I get pretty detailed, shot size, movement, dialogue, action, sometimes even lens choice, specialty gear, is there a dolly, is there a crane, is there, it's just on sticks, whether sound is needed or not, or MOS. Surprisingly, there's not a whole lot of tools out there for this. This is made with Shot Designer. It's kind of like an old school app that was, I think, created in 2000 and hasn't really been updated yet, but it still works. They at least keep up with like the new OS updates. You can do this. That's what I use. You can do that with other. There's Cetus Link Pro that does that, although that's more for DPs. So that they do lighting diagrams. So it would be kind of the same thing, but with lights on top of it. I think it does its job. But in any case, I think this, doing it that way is a great way to really start establishing, not only just your shot list, but your blocking, your coverage, making sure you're starting to tell the story in the right way. For me, it's like, it really is one of the most, creative part of the process. It's where I start establishing all this stuff, how I'm going to execute the vision on the day. And I do those very, very early in the process. Typically, I get a script, I'll do a version of it, and then after we've done scouts and we've found casting, I'll revise and do a second pass. But when you do it early at this stage, there's very little constraints, and so for me, it's a great way similar to the treatment, but more in detail to really hone in on like, okay, this is exactly what we're gonna see in this spot. I would argue this is where the real directing begins. Scout photos, they're also key to establishing the vision. I take mine with an app called Artemis, which is basically a director's viewfinder in an app form. So you can use it on your phone, whatever phone you have. What's great about it is that you can enter, the camera you're going to shoot in and the lens that you're going to shoot in, and it gives you, the actual field of view, right? I mean, you're still getting the quality of the iPhone, but you can see, okay, I want a medium shot and a medium close-up. This is what it's going to look like on location. Again, start getting a clear idea of what you're blocking and your coverage is, right? Remember that, good coverage and good blocking, those are the first step in effectively telling a story. Think about the average length of a commercial, 30 seconds. Within a 30-second commercial, there is typically, 30 shots, sorry. The average length of a shot is about 1 second. Sometimes it's very slow, 3 seconds. If it's very fast, like kind of an action thing, half a second. So you don't have that many shots at the end of the day. And, I think it's very important in each of those shots to move the story forward. Don't repeat the shot and make sure that each one adds something to the story. And that's a great way to do it. One thing I want to add is that sometimes I'll do scout photos, even if I don't have access to the scouts, to like the location where I want to shoot. I'll do scout photos at my house with my wife and my kid, just to, again, start getting a sense of like coverage and blocking and what all this is going to look like. The pre-edit. I don't always do that. This is an example made with storyboards. I think this is important when the edit is going to be very tight, or if there's really like specific beats that need to be gone through. I do this very often with comedy, for instance. In comedy, pace, timing, the music, all this, how all this comes together, really makes a difference for the entertaining value of the piece. And so doing a pre-edit, even if I don't have the storyboard, sometimes I'll do it just with cards, like medium close-up, wide shot, and just a quick description. Just helps me narrow down. Do I need all those shots that I put in my shot list? Do I need that complex coverage, or can I get by with just like less shots? And often I end up removing things from my initial plan, which in turn, makes the schedule easier, and which in turn, we'll talk about later, opens up to, having more time to actually be creative on set. That pre-edit that I was talking is not something that I typically share with anyone. It's more like for me to kind of refine my process, right? So back to this diagram, right? I think sometimes people forget how much the logistical approach matter on set, right? It's one thing to have a great idea of what you're going to do, but if you don't actually execute on it the right way, then you missed out, right? So really thinking about it in a logistical way, is this possible, I think is important ahead of like just being on set, being like, we can actually shoot this way. We don't have time to do this shot. Obviously rely on your crew for that. Your DP can help, like, okay, how much time is it going to take to set up that thing? Or our department, you need like some background, that's going to take time. Rely on them to like figure out the logistic. But I think when you start from there, with that overhead diagram, it becomes so much more easy to have that conversation to communicate effectively. I mean, if you take like kind of there's a lot of shots in there, right? That was kind of a complex coverage for this one. But you see, if you take the bottom part, they're all pointed at the same direction, right? And the top part over there, where the blue guy is by himself, it's a different part of the set. So for one, just looking at that, you can already say, all right, well, there's a lot to cover in that direction. How's the sun? How are the background? Is that going to change? This is on location, right? We're not in studio, or we need to like think of those things. Flip side, those shots over there, we can kind of knock that quickly. So, it gets you started in this part of like, what is the logistic? Can I make this happen within whatever constraints I have, location, time, et cetera? So, no matter what you do, some roadblocks might happen, right? In pre-pro or on the shoot day. But I think the clearer you are on the vision, the more you anticipate, both in terms of, of visual terms and in terms of logistics, the better the final result will be. So, remember, pre-production. It's the most important part of the process. So really pay attention to it, anticipate as much as possible, really spend time turning the project every which way. Imagine creative alternatives, imagine contingencies, for everything. The more you can be specific and precise with that, the better you're going to be. Don't ever hope for the best, right? Remember the magician. We do not want to be the magician. Don't want to hope for the best. And lastly, rely on your team to help, which leads me to the teaming question, right? Both crew and talent, I'm going to talk about both, and why it's so important to pick right? I think it's obvious that you want to pick people that know what they're doing in all key positions, that are willing to share their expertise, on shoot day or in pre-pro. But beyond that, I personally also want people that are going to challenge my vision, right? So that we can together elevate the piece one step further. So I think there's something about empowering your crew to do that. This is a behind the scene of a shoot we did for Manscaped a few years ago. And while this is playing, I wanted to do like a quick sidebar on AI, since it's such a topic these days. I think AI has its place in the pre-production process in particular. I've used it for this presentation. I use it for treatment quite often. I've used Gen AI a little bit for other things and experimented with it, but I don't think it's ready for prime time. That's a separate conversation. I think what's missing, though, from the entire conversation is how you're losing out from the collaborative aspect of, of being on set. If you've ever worked with ChatGPT, for instance, and asked ChatGPT if whatever you wrote was good, typically the answer is, yes, Thierry, you're awesome, you're doing great, all of this is perfect, nobody could have done it better, right? That is not what you want in any production environment. Ideally, you've hired, we're going to talk about hiring the right people, but you have people with you that hopefully are skilled at what they do, have a vision of their own, whether it's a DP, your art director, your sound guy, your editor later, the stylist, whatever. Those people should be, experienced and skilled at what they do and be able to provide something. So being able to, again, basically, if you end up being just a director behind a computer, you're foregoing all of this. And I'm not even talking about obviously killing the jobs of all those people, right? Which is important. So back to crewing up. Here are a few things I personally pay attention when picking people to work with. Number one, trust. People do you have a good vibe with? I think that's very key. Number one in my mind. Mindset over resume. I look for people that are proactive, problem solvers, more than people are, you want people that are doing a good job, but I think having the right mindset of coming to set with hey, we're going to make this awesome, we're going to do our best, we're going to solve problem, I think that's key. The no asshole policy, I've talked about it for the director, but I think it's valid for the crew as well. Because if you have one asshole in the crew, I can guarantee you it's gonna poison the well, and everybody's gonna be in a bad mood, and therefore also less creative, less able to problem solve. Skills. You'll notice it's 4 in the number 4 in that list, and it's on purpose because obviously you want to have people that know what they're doing, right? But personally, I'd rather work with somebody that has the right mindset than somebody who's more experienced but is an asshole, right? And lastly, bigger isn't always better, you know. There's always a right size for every project, I believe, you know. I mean, these days with budget shrinking, it tends to be, you know, we don't have enough crew. But I think even if you get yourself into a situation where there's a lot of budget for crew, there's a moment where you don't want to have too many people. You know, you want to be able to move as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. Sometimes moving faster means more people. Sometimes it means less, right? San Diego for the win. You know, on that note, I think we're super lucky in San Diego to have an amazing production community. Besides, you know, a few cranky grips here and there, I've never worked with any assholes. Everybody that I've worked with has always, you know, had a great mindset, great attitude. So, you know, props to you all. All right, let's talk about casting. So, casting, you know, when briefing, sorry if it's a bit of a strong transition from crew to this, but I think, you know, there's a few things that I personally pay attention when casting. I like to go deeper than age range and ethnicity, you know, and talk about tone and internal life in the brief. In a few months, you guys, there's the thing with Shaman Freitas. It was a great agency with San Diego Media Pro. I'm sure she would address that one way or another. I think it's important to, you know, give some material to your talents before you even talk to them, right? So personally, I take the character that is written in the script. This often doesn't have much, you know, details about, you know, and then I'll elaborate a little bit on it and send something like this, right? Like deadpan with warmth, you know, think Adam Driver in a tight spot. Overly intense, but trying to seem chill, you know, a discount Christian Bale doing customer service. Or endearing and awkward, early Michael Cera testimonial vibe, which is, by the way, an actual commercial that was at the Super Bowl a couple years ago, I think. Yeah, for CeraVe. You see, this is where you can start as a director to give direction, right? That informs the type of personality you're looking for, that informs, you know, that gives material to an actor, you know, so that he or she can grab onto it and, you know, come to the audition later or do a self-tape in a way that is more in line with what you want to achieve. This is an example of the same Shady Ray shoot that I was showing the shot list for, and you see this is what I sent to the agency and to the casting director. On the script, it just said supervisor, deputy supervisor, desk agent 1 and 2. It did not go further than that. You know, I tried to imagine actual character and then give reference. I mean, in this case, we were playing on tropes a lot, so it was easy to find, okay, we're doing CIA type leader, and, you know, all those very well-known actors have played a CIA type character, spy type character. And then, you know, just again, finding ways that, there's some more depth in the casting. By doing that, not only it helps me picking the right person, right, but it helps the actor, you know, even if their time to shine is 4 seconds in a 30-second spot, it gives them depth, and it gives, I think, overall, it will elevate the piece because all of a sudden, you know, they are more than just a person there. Couple other tips for casting. Never, ever, ever, ever cast from a headshot. Please, do not do that. You see, this was made by AI, but this is the same person, right? Like, I mean, so you're getting a headshot. Is that lady, that talent, is she 20 blonde, or is she 35 and brunette? Is her hair short or long? I mean, talent may or may not have updated their headshots. You don't know. Do not cast from a headshot. On top of this, you know, it doesn't give you any sense of their vibe, their personality, their tone, their timing, their delivery, their presence. All this stuff is, you know, just go right back. So please do not do that. Instead, do self-tapes. Self-tapes are. This is my daughter, by the way. She is represented by Shaman Freitas, and she's doing a self-tape. And you see, you know, I could take really pretty, I have taken really pretty picture of my daughter, but like seeing her like this, you know, in this like kind of neutral backdrop, much better way to get a sense of who she is, and then she's going to talk. So baseline, I think, for anyone doing, production, and I would argue even photography. Ask for self-tape. You'll get a much better sense of who they are. But whenever time allows, do callbacks, right? Because that's when, again, you can start directing, right? The actor. You'll see how they take direction. You can say, hey, what about you do it a little bit more like this? Can they pivot? Can they not? Gives you a sense of their skill set. When I first started out, I made the common mistake to cast people mostly on vibes and looks. Remember the savior myth, right? I had the idea that I could fix it on set, right? I mean, the agency loves them. They fit the right, they have the right look. They kind of have done stuff before. They have a good vibe. Let's go with it. Even if they didn't give me something good in the self-tape or on the callback, because I assumed that I could fix it. I mean, honestly, sometimes maybe if you have a very, very chill shoot, you can kind of dive into it, but 90% of the time, you do not have time to do that. There's just no time to really direct the talent, in depth or have them pivot. Typically, they'll come prepared, right? If they're professional, they know what they're doing. They're coming with already, this is what I'm going to do today. And sometimes it's hard for them to change on the fly, right? So, have pick talents at callbacks that already give you a baseline, something that is already great, right? And then, if you have an opportunity to elevate that, go for it. A few extra tips, cast for timing, particularly if I'm doing a lot of comedy. I think this is very important. Somebody that understands the subtext of the spots. They're for 2 seconds on camera. They need to really deliver a lot within those 2 seconds. Chemistry is important. More important, I would argue, than perfection. If you're casting duos, a couple, parents and child, a brother, sister, whatever, coworker. Put them in the room together, even if it's a virtual room, to kind of see how they work together. That chemistry piece is more important, in my opinion, than how great of an actor they are. And the vibe check, something that I do always, either at the beginning of or at the end of a callback, where I just ask them about their life. What's their hobbies? Try to get to know them a little bit. I think 20 seconds of a person, an actor, giving them something more than what they've rehearsed about their life, something unscripted. I think that's sometimes that can say a lot. So let's move on to the third aspect of pre-production, that I think is key: creating trust. We talked about your crew already. Trust is super important there. I'll talk a bit more about the client, right? I think whether it's an agency, a production company, or a brand, I think it's very, very important to establish trust. The last thing you want, is to have the clients, nitpick 368th time the brief, right? So how do you create trust? You can go have a beer, you can connect over your favorite football team, but I think a client will trust you more if they feel like you have a solid plan. We talked about that solid plan. You have a clear vision. We talked about that. You listen to their concerns, and then you're proactive about it. So you solve the problems and you listen. Right? Couple of tips, that I do. This is more for the producers in the room, I would argue, but it applies to directors to an extent. Over-communicate on budget. I think, money conversations are always tricky, but I would say that being upfront and clear about what's possible, what's not, is always important. Build buffers in your timeline. That kind of relates to this idea of problem solving, right? Listening to them and then problem solving. It's one thing that you listen, when they say, hey, I would like to do something different, but now you don't have buffer in your timeline to actually act on it. So make sure to think about that ahead of time. Document the approach, all this should be written. And lastly, set up calls with them. I think there's a lot of things a lot of meaning and important parts that can be overlooked in an email, or even a very detailed treatment you're sending them, or very detailed budgets. Setting up calls and going over the important parts, I think makes a big difference in establishing trust. So, Let's talk about aligning. Again, the stepchild of trust, right? If you've created trust, it's easier to align. The goal here is to ensure that everyone is aligned, though. It's not just you and the client. It's not just the director and the client, the producer and the clients. It's the director, the producer, the crew, the talents, everybody, right? Everybody should be going in the same direction. We talked about the treatment a little bit. I'll kind of gloss over that. The budget, I talked about, over communicating on budget. This is an example of over communication on budget. All line items. This is an AICP budget, which is a format made by the AICP. It says all the details of everything you have. I send this not because I expect my clients to actually understand, because this is a lot, right? I send this because for a couple of reasons. One, I think, production is expensive. The end price tag is always a lot, often more than what I expected. And so when they see this, they can easily be like, it's easier for them to realize, there's a lot that go into it, right? There's a lot of people spending a lot of time, and there's gear, and there's all this stuff, right? So I think it's easier to have that hard conversation when that's in front of them. On the flip side, the detail aspect of the budget makes it so that if they change something, then it's easier to have the conversation about overages, right? And all of this, again, establish trust, align. We can say, hey, this is exactly what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Here is the budget for it. The production deck. So this is the holy grail of the pre-pro, I would say. It should track everything that's going on. The personnel list, the scripts, the casting, the locations, the set design, the wardrobe, the schedule, the timeline, everything. And it's an evolving document, right? Often it's more on a Google slide than anything else so that you can add to it as you're finding the location, update the location. But this is very, 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 very important because it's a place where, again, you can align, right? With the client can see this and be like, oh, okay, all right, this is what, they're going to wear. The crew, wardrobe can be like, hey, this is what I'm bringing. The set design, those are the props, right? But that said, just like the budget, don't assume that, specifically client side, that people understand that and they haven't just skimmed it. Sometimes, I've been in the situation, for instance, with the wardrobe where, I showed that, right, something like this. And then, we got to set and the client, oh, we don't have options? Well, no, we agreed on this, right? Like, I sent you this, we talked about it, this is what they're wearing, right? So no, we don't have a different color. I mean, maybe we have different sizes and slight variation, but we don't have like red if we talked about gray the whole time. So again, having those conversations, often early before the shoot day, uncovers some things that I think are important to uncover. The production schedule, location. Call sheet, I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time on this and what you should have in it. The one thing that I would say is that, whoever makes this, other people should verify it. Because it's easy, to make those at 10 p.m. When you're tired after a long day and mess up something about the schedule or something that was agreed upon. The next day when crew is not showing up at the right time, right location, or that the schedule is not clear, I think it can, it really start the day in the wrong way. So, check it out often. The shot list, going back to this, I think it's an important part of the alignment piece, right? This was the control room of that project. So those are desks. You see the talents here, the little colored circle. You see the camera. I show up on set in the morning with this. Whenever somebody's asked me a question like, hey, where do we put those desks? Hey, where the talents go? Hey, where did the camera go? Like, look, it's right there. It's very, very straightforward. So it allows, again, everybody to be aligned, share a similar language, everything is very clear. So, one more time, third time's the charm, right? Pre-production is the most important part of the process. By doing all this, by solving any problems that arises, while you're sitting comfortably in a chair, I think you save yourself so much headaches. You save yourself money, overages. You save yourself a pissed off crew. You save yourself a pissed off client. So it's important. All right, let's move on to actual shoot day, running the floor. You'll see this is, I'm getting almost to the end of my time. This is the shortest part of my presentation because, as I already said it, right? Remember what Hitchcock used to say about the shoot being creatively boring because he did everything beforehand, right? Well, if you've established the vision, if you've picked the right people to help you with said vision, if you've created trust, if you align, there shouldn't be a ton to figure out on set, right? That said, you also don't want to be just a traffic cop, right? That's no fun, right? So instead, figure out ways to be flexible, right, with the plan in a way that, ensures that the plan is achieved and keeps the schedule, but also gives space to elevate, the work one more notch, right? I mean, after all, I named this presentation How to Run a Commercial Shoot, not How to Run a Commercial Pre-Pro. So, the pre-pro was all about buttoning up, the plan so that you have something super detailed. The shoot itself, in my opinion, is about using the plan as a springboard to create something even more awesome, So on-set flexibility is a superpower. I'm going back to that shot list one more time. Personally, on set, I use that shot list as a checklist, right? It's the baseline of what I want to do. If I do just what's on the shot list, then great, we've covered it all. But at the same time, it's not, it's just a checklist. If my DP comes and say, hey, you know what about we do this shot this way, and it turns out that it's, it looks better, great. Seize the day. What about a talent comes and be like, hey, you know what, this one thing, this one delivery or this movement that you have me doing, what about I do it this way instead? And it works, right? Great, Give yourself, to me, it gives me the space to do this. Particularly like on that diagram, sometimes I will even write, kind of like nice to have or must haves on every shot so that, if we're behind because some, unexpected event or I took too long to direct the talent, then we can move on to what I know we absolutely need versus what, would be good to have for coverage or for like more options in the edit room. I mentioned that before. I think it's important to empower the crew and the talent to challenge the plan, right? Have them bring up some ideas that are going to be, are going to make everything greater. But, again, because you have that checklist, run those suggestions against the vision, right? It shouldn't derail the vision. Sometimes my DP came to me and be like, hey, what about we do this? I'm like, no, it doesn't work because I did the pre-edit, and in the pre-edit, if I put this shot this way, it won't cut right? I know that already, right? So run it against your vision, but be open to it. I've said this one again, but on shoot day, don't be an asshole. I like to repeat it. I think there's a lot to say about shoots being stressful. There's often a lot of money at stake, and especially if you're kind of starting in your career, it can be a lot, right? So it's easy sometimes for people to get stressed, short, whatever. But I personally think that, really making it a mantra, that you should not be an asshole is going to make everything better. It's going to make not only the process for you and others better, it's going to make the work better because people are going to be so much more inclined to problem solve, to suggest some great idea, to be creative if the atmosphere is positive. Let's talk a little bit about the clients. I think it's easy to forget who's paying for all this, right? And what's at stake for the clients. Sometimes you'll have a client on set that is, it's their whole job. It's the big marketing campaign they're doing that year. The CEO has trusted them with tens of thousands of dollars to do this. And they, if they don't get it right, and if there's a problem, then it's their head on the chopping block, right? So I think it's important to manage that experience, from a director standpoint, from a producer standpoint. A few things that I do, dedicated video village. You don't want to be it to be too close to the action, but not too far either. Snacks and coffee, people need to, want to drink and have a coffee. It's always good to make people physically comfortable. I think something that is very important is a dedicated person with them. That's somebody that understands the schedule, what's going on that day, what are you trying to do at every point of the day. And that can be next to the client to field questions. Because again, maybe a lot is riding on for this client. They may be very anxious, and having a person that right away can say, hey, it's fine, we're doing this, we're moving to that. That helps a lot. And lastly, regular check-ins, right? Because I'll talk about regular check-ins in a second, but I wanted to add this, that, the clients and commercials may hire you for your reel. You may have done some amazing work before, looks stellar. Yes, you got the job. But they will rehire you. I'm firmly believer in that because of the experience they had, right? I mean, great, make a great product at the end, but if they had a bad time, you're not going to be rehired. So hopefully you want to grow your career, get rehired, have repeat clients. Those are the best types of client. So do all this. Let's talk about the check-in real quick. I think it's important to ask, from the director, the producer, people that are really leading the shoot, come often to see clients and ask, hey, how you feeling? Is it good for you? What do you think? The idea here is that the result can be one of three things. First, no notes, everything's perfect, you're doing great. Well, good, boost your confidence, you're feeling better. Option two, a false alarm. You're shooting, they're like, well, I'm very worried that we're not seeing the product logo enough, right? But it turns out you're at the beginning of your day. Right now you're doing the establishing shot. You're going to do an insert. You know that. They don't know that, even if they have the schedule. So you can remind them, hey, it's cool. We're going to do this later. Well, doing that, it doesn't change anything for the schedule, but it does for their anxiety because now they can say, now they can relax and know that what's important for them is coming, right? You're going to get to it. The third one is the real save. Imagine you start shooting the establishing shots and you come checking on them and they're like, well, it's great, it looks amazing, but our customers, they hold the product in their left hand and you have it, the talent in the screen, it has it in this right hand, right? You want to know that early because this could absolutely mess up the entire process. Imagine if you ask that same question an hour later when you've already done all the coverage and all the blocking of that particular scene. Well, you have to start again. Imagine you don't ask that question at all, and then you get to editing, and then you get to sending them the stuff, and it's all great, but you can't use it because it's not, the talent's not holding the product the right way, right? And don't assume that they will come and tell you. Because shoots, again, can be a lot, especially for people that have never done it. There's lots of people, there's lights, there's talent, it has all this stuff going on, right? So don't assume that they will come and tell you. Instead, show up, ask them regularly, hey, what do you think? What's going on? All right, so we're at the end of the day, and we got the martini here to mark the end of this presentation. You've survived the shoots. But before we wrap up this talk, I want to leave you with kind of the 10,000-foot view. You'll notice that I've talked a little bit about casting. I've talked a little bit about, the shot list. I haven't talked really in depth about, coverage, the blocking, directing talent particularly. I didn't really talk much about wardrobe, set design, all this stuff that's really important and is very much associated to directing. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover it all. So that's one of the reasons. But also, I think it really looks different, from one person to another. It's very much often a question of taste and creativity. Overall, no matter the specifics of the project, I think it's really hard to be creative on set when you're figuring out stuff on the fly, right? Hence me going back and back again to this. pre-production is the most important part of the process. It's not just about making a pretty shot, right? Or getting a great performance, out of an actor. It's really about designing a process that allows for more to happen on set, right? Having that baseline of, this is awesome, this is what I'm doing, and then you get there, and then you utilize the amazing people that are with you, the crew and talent, to go one step further, right? And when you're all prepared, you have the space to do that, right? So, on to the final takeaway. I call this presentation how to run a commercial shoot like a pro, honestly because it's sketchy. That's my ID there. But beyond that, I think there's a particular approach, right, that separates amateur, and I'm putting a lot of quotation mark there because including people that still get paid to do it, with the pros. I think that on shoot days, amateurs rely on miracles, right, and pros rely on process. All these things that we've talked about, it's established. It's you're doing it, you're going through it, you're anticipating, so that when you get there, it's all nice, chill, and dandy, right? That's it for me. Thank you again for being here. Ocam, so I'm Thierry. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, but I'm Thierry. I'm a commercial director. I do comedy spots mainly, and co-founder of Ocam, which is a local production company. This is our reel.
To my